I, 62, am a widow. My husband, David, passed away just over a year ago, and the silence in our home has been the hardest part. It was a big house, the one we had built together, the one where we raised our only son, Leo. Every corner held a memory. Every scuff on the floor told a story. It was my sanctuary, but to my son and his wife, Chloe, it was just real estate. They saw it as an asset, a burden, something to be managed. They had started visiting more often after David died, their concern cloaked in a thin veil of practicality that felt more like pressure with each passing week. They lived in a small, modern apartment downtown, a place that Chloe often described as efficient but temporary. The conversations always started the same way. Leo would begin, his voice gentle and full of what he thought was loving concern. "Mom, have you thought any more about the house? It's just so much for you to handle on your own." I would tell him the truth. I would say that the garden was my therapy, that the familiar rooms were a comfort, that I was not ready to leave. Then Chloe would chime in, her tone bright and helpful, but her words felt like tiny, sharp pebbles. "We just worry, that's all. A smaller place would be so much easier for you. Less cleaning, fewer stairs. We could find you a lovely little condo." I knew they meant well, or at least I told myself Leo did. Chloe was harder to read. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else. Her clothes were designer, her car was new, and her social media was a carefully curated gallery of a perfect life. My home, with its comfortable, lived-in furniture and its slightly overgrown rose bushes, did not fit into that picture. She saw it as a project, and me as the primary obstacle to its completion. She was always polite to my face, but there was an edge to her smile, a dismissive flick of her eyes when she looked at my wedding china or the photographs on the mantelpiece. The line was crossed on a Sunday evening. They had come over for dinner, a weekly ritual they had insisted upon. I made roast chicken, David's favorite. The meal was pleasant enough, filled with small talk about their jobs and friends I had never met. As I was clearing the plates, Leo followed me into the kitchen. He stood by the counter, looking uneasy. "Mom, Chloe and I were talking," he started, and my stomach tightened. I knew what was coming next. "We really think it's time. We found a broker who specializes in this neighborhood. He thinks we could get a great price for the house." I turned off the tap and faced him, my hands still damp. "Leo, I have told you. I am not selling my home." He sighed, a long, weary sound. "It's not just your home, Mom. It's an investment. It's equity just sitting here. You could use that money to travel, to enjoy your retirement." "I am enjoying my retirement," I said quietly. "Right here." Just then, Chloe appeared in the doorway, a wine glass held delicately in her hand. She gave me a sympathetic, almost pitying smile. She didn't look at me directly, but instead turned her head slightly towards Leo, as if I were a child who couldn't understand the adult conversation. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but it was loud enough for me to hear every single, condescending word. "It's time to downsize," she murmured, then took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. That was it. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. She had passed judgment on my life, on my home, on my grief, and found them all inconvenient. In that moment, the polite facade I had maintained for years cracked. I saw her not as my son's wife, but as a predator circling something she wanted. She saw a helpless old woman. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. The feeling was cold and sharp inside me. I knew then that I had to do something. I had to protect myself. After they left that night, I walked through the quiet rooms of my house. I touched the back of David's favorite armchair. I ran my fingers over the books on our shelves. This wasn't just wood and plaster to me. It was the container of my entire adult life. The idea of Chloe's sterile, modern furniture replacing ours, of her knocking down walls that had heard our family's laughter and arguments, filled me with a rage that was surprisingly clarifying. The grief was still there, a heavy blanket over everything, but now there was something else, too. A steely resolve. I would not be downsized. I would not be erased from my own life. The next week, they called to say they were coming over. "We want to help you sort through some of Dad's things in the attic," Leo said. "We know it must be hard for you to do it alone." The offer sounded kind, but after Chloe's comment, I was suspicious of everything. Still, I agreed. It was better to have them here, where I could watch them, than to have them making plans behind my back. Or so I thought. They arrived on Saturday morning, armed with boxes and packing tape. Chloe was dressed in expensive athletic wear, as if she were about to tackle a major renovation project. She was full of energy, directing Leo to move boxes and label containers. "We should start with the big stuff," she announced, striding towards the attic stairs. "Clear out the clutter first. It will make the whole space feel so much bigger." I followed them up the narrow stairs into the dusty space under the eaves. It was filled with forgotten treasures and decades of accumulated life. Old baby clothes, Leo's school projects, boxes of David's books. I felt a pang of sadness looking at it all. Chloe, however, saw only empty space. "Wow, you could easily put another bathroom up here," she said, tapping a wall. "Or even a small office." Leo shot her a look and she quickly added, "For you, I mean. A nice little hobby room or something." I said nothing. I just watched them. While Leo was carefully going through a box of his old comic books, a nostalgic smile on his face, Chloe was pacing the length of the attic, her phone in her hand, occasionally pointing it at the ceiling as if measuring angles. She seemed far more interested in the structure of the house than in the memories it held. Later, she insisted on seeing the basement. "We have to check for dampness," she said with an air of authority. "It's a major factor in a home's value." Down in the cool, dry basement, she did the same thing, walking around, tapping on the concrete walls, and peering at the plumbing. "This is a great space," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Lots of potential." I felt a growing sense of dread. This was not about helping a grieving widow sort through her late husband's possessions. This was an inspection. They were assessing the property. My property. The day wore on, and my unease grew with every suggestion she made, every calculating glance she gave the rooms. Leo seemed oblivious, lost in his childhood memories as he went through boxes. He was being used, a willing pawn in her game. The moment of truth came late in the afternoon. I was in the kitchen making tea, my back to the garden window. Their voices drifted in from the patio, where they had gone to take a break. Leo sounded tired. "Maybe we should slow down, Chloe. This is a lot for her." Chloe's voice was sharp, impatient. "We can't slow down, Leo. The timing is perfect. If we wait, she might change her mind or get some other idea in her head." There was a pause. Then I heard Chloe's voice again, lower this time, but the window was open a crack, and the sound carried. She must have thought I was still in the attic. "I already spoke to Jonathan," she said. I recognized the name. He was an interior designer she admired, someone she followed religiously online. "He's drawing up the plans. The master suite will be ours, of course. We'll knock out that wall between the two smaller bedrooms to make a huge walk-in closet." My hand froze on the kettle. I could barely breathe. "And what about Mom?" Leo asked, his voice hesitant. Chloe's reply was casual, dismissive, and it shattered my world. "Her little room will be in the basement. It gets some afternoon sun. We can put in a nice rug. It's for the best. She'll be safe, and we'll be right here to look after her." The kettle slipped from my grasp and clattered into the sink. They both fell silent. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sound echoing in my ears. A room. In the basement. They weren't planning to move me to a condo. They were planning to move in here, into my home, my life, and relegate me to the cellar like a piece of old furniture they didn't have the heart to throw away. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about my son, my only child, conspiring to put his own mother in the basement. I quickly composed myself, my mind racing. I could not let them know I had heard. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I took a deep breath, filled the kettle again, and forced my hands to be steady. When I carried the tray of tea out to the patio, I smiled at them as if I hadn't heard a thing. You too must be exhausted, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. Thank you so much for your help today. Chloe's smile was radiant. Of course, she said. Anything for family. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, replaying her words over and over in my head. Her little room will be in the basement. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. How had I not seen this coming? The subtle insults, the constant pressure, the way she looked at my home not with warmth, but with avarice. I had made excuses for her, for Leo's sake. I had told myself she was just different, that her values were not my values. But this was not a difference in values. This was a breathtaking lack of them. And Leo, my son, the boy I had raised to be kind and compassionate, he had just stood there and let her plan my eviction from my own life. His question, "And what about Mom?" was so weak, so pathetic. It wasn't a defense of me, it was a logistical query. Where do we put the old lady? The pain of that was sharper than anything Chloe could ever do to me. He was my blood, my heart, and he was letting her do this. I knew I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. They would deny it. Chloe would twist it, make me seem crazy, paranoid, a grieving widow who was confused. She would turn Leo further against me. I needed proof. I needed something undeniable that would force Leo to see his wife for who she truly was. The anger that had been simmering for weeks now burned hot and clear. It was no longer just about keeping my house. It was about reclaiming my dignity. The first person I called was my best friend, Brenda. We had known each other for 40 years. She had been there when Leo was born, and she was there holding my hand at David's funeral. I told her everything, my voice low and shaking as I recounted the conversation I had overheard. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Brenda said, "That little witch. I never trusted her." "What do I do, Brenda?" I asked, feeling lost for the first time. "You fight," she said, her voice firm. "You don't let them do this to you. First things first, you need to be smart. Don't let them know you're onto them. Play along, but watch everything. And you need to start protecting yourself legally. I know a guy, a financial advisor who specializes in estate planning. He's a shark. You need a shark right now." Her words were a lifeline. She was right. I couldn't afford to be emotional. I had to be strategic. The next time Leo and Chloe came over, I was ready. I was pleasant, but distant. I offered them tea, but didn't sit down with them. I made myself busy in another room, listening. I decided to test them. While Chloe was in the bathroom, I approached Leo in the living room. I kept my tone light, conversational. "You know, Leo," I began, "I was thinking about what you said. About this house being too much for me." His face lit up with relief. "Really, Mom? That's great. I knew you'd see it was for the best." "Well, I was thinking," I continued, watching him carefully, "maybe I'll just hire a gardener and a cleaning service. That would take care of the upkeep. I could probably stay here for another few years that way." The relief on his face vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He started to stammer. But Mom, we've talked about this. A service is so expensive. And you'd still be all alone. It's not safe." Just then, Chloe returned. She must have heard the last part of our conversation. She glided over to Leo and put a hand on his arm, her smile perfectly sweet, her eyes like chips of ice. "We just worry about you," she said to me, her voice dripping with false concern. "What if you fell? Who would know? It's our responsibility as your family to make sure you're safe and comfortable." It was a perfectly crafted performance. The concerned daughter-in-law. But I saw it for what it was, a threat veiled in care. They weren't worried about me falling. They were worried about me staying. Their reaction confirmed my worst fears. They had a plan, and they were not going to let a little thing like my own wishes get in the way. That evening after they left, I searched the guest room where they sometimes stayed. Chloe was meticulous, but people get careless when they feel secure. I looked under the bed, in the drawers, even in the closet. Tucked away in the back of the wardrobe, behind a stack of spare blankets, was a sleek leather briefcase that belonged to Chloe. I hesitated for a moment. This felt like a terrible invasion of privacy. But then I remembered her words, "Her little room will be in the basement," and my hesitation vanished. My survival was more important than her privacy. I opened the briefcase. Inside, it was all business. Folders, a tablet, a notebook. I opened the first folder. My breath caught in my throat. It was filled with brochures for high-end kitchen renovations, bathroom fixtures, and landscaping services. There were quotes from contractors, pages torn from design magazines. And pinned to one of the pages was a floor plan. It was a perfect architectural drawing of my house. My house, but altered. Walls were missing. Rooms were repurposed. And there, in the basement, was a small square labeled guest suite. They had not just been talking about it. They had been actively planning it for months. They had hired people, gotten quotes, drawn up plans for my home while smiling to my face and talking about how much they worried about me. I felt sick. I flipped through more pages. There were financial documents, too. Bank statements, investment summaries. Some of them were mine. I recognized the letterhead from my own bank. They must have gone through my desk, my mail. They had been gathering intelligence, assessing my financial situation to see how best to proceed. I knew I needed to copy everything, but I didn't have a scanner. I took out my phone and carefully, with shaking hands, I photographed every single page. The floor plans, the quotes, the financial documents that proved they had been snooping. I put everything back exactly as I had found it and closed the briefcase. I felt cold, violated, but also grimly determined. This was the proof I needed. This was the beginning of my fight back. The next day, I called the financial advisor Brenda had recommended. His name was Arthur Vance. He agreed to see me immediately. I went to his office with the photos on my phone and a heavy heart. I explained the situation, my voice low and steady as I laid out the facts. The pressure to sell, the overheard conversation, the contents of the briefcase. Arthur listened patiently, his face impassive. He was an older gentleman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice calm and serious. "This is, unfortunately, not as uncommon as you might think. It's a classic case of what we call predatory inheritance planning." "What can they do?" I asked. "The house is in my name." David's will was very clear. "The will is your strongest protection," he explained. "But they can make things difficult. They can try to pressure you, to wear you down emotionally. Based on what you've shown me, they might even be laying the groundwork to challenge your competency to manage your own affairs." The words hit me like a punch. Competency. They would try to make me seem old and confused, incapable of making my own decisions. Chloe's comments about my forgetfulness, which I had dismissed as casual insults, now seemed sinister, calculated. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "First, we secure your assets," Arthur said, leaning forward. "We move your liquid assets into a new account at a different bank, an account they know nothing about. We get all your important documents, the deed to your house, your will, your financial statements, and we put them in a safe deposit box. Today. Second, you do not sign anything they give you. Not a thing. And third, you change the locks on your house." The simple, practical steps felt like a battle plan. It gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. I left his office feeling stronger, more focused. I went straight to the bank and followed his instructions. Then I went to the hardware store and bought new deadbolts for all my doors. That evening, a locksmith came and installed them. Holding the new set of keys in my hand felt like a declaration of independence. This was my home, my fortress, and I was securing the gates. The inevitable phone call came the next morning. It was Leo. "Mom? I'm outside. My key doesn't work. Did you change the locks?" He sounded more confused than angry. "Yes, I did," I said calmly. "I'm upgrading the security system. You'll just need to call before you come over from now on. That's all." There was a pause. I could hear Chloe's voice in the background, sharp and angry. Then she was on the phone. "What is this? What are you trying to pull, locking your own son out of his family home?" "It's not his family home, Chloe," I said, my voice as cold as ice. It is my home, and I can change my own locks if I want it. You are being ridiculous and paranoid, she snapped. Am I? I replied. Perhaps you're right. I'll see you both for dinner on Sunday. We have a lot to talk about, and then I hung up. The silence that followed was wonderful. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I had drawn a line in the sand. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time since David died, I felt like I had a fighting chance. I was not just a grieving widow. I was the keeper of this house, the guardian of my own life. And I would not be moved. The days leading up to that Sunday dinner were filled with a tense quiet. I didn't hear from Leo or Chloe, which I knew was a bad sign. They were regrouping, planning their next move. I used the time to prepare. I met with Arthur again. We went over my legal position. He assured me that as long as I remained firm, they had no legal standing to force me to sell. The real danger was emotional manipulation. They will try to make you feel guilty, isolated, and unreasonable, he warned me. Be ready for that. I also spent time talking to my sister, Sarah. I hadn't wanted to burden her with it before, but I needed all the support I could get. I told her the whole story, from the Downsize comment to the briefcase full of renovation plans. Sarah was quiet for a long time after I finished, her teacup resting untouched in her saucer. Then she looked at me, her eyes flashing with anger. That girl, she said, her voice tight. I knew there was something off about her from the day Leo brought her home. So much ambition. It's not a bad thing, but with her it feels hungry. And Leo just goes along with it, I said, the familiar ache in my chest. Leo has always been a peacemaker, Sarah reminded me gently. He avoids conflict at all costs. It's his biggest weakness. Chloe knows that, and she uses it. Having Sarah on my side was a comfort. We agreed that she would call me on Sunday evening, just after Leo and Chloe were scheduled to leave. It was a small safety measure, a way to make sure I was all right. On Sunday, I prepared for their arrival as if I were preparing for a diplomatic summit. I made a simple dinner, nothing fancy. I wanted the focus to be on the conversation, not the food. I set the table in the dining room, the room we only used for special occasions. I wanted the setting to feel formal, serious. When they arrived, the tension was palpable. Leo wouldn't meet my eyes. He gave me a quick, awkward hug and immediately started talking about the weather. Chloe, on the other hand, was all smiles and false warmth. She was wearing a crisp white dress and looked impeccable, like an angel of mercy come to save me from myself. She handed me a bouquet of lilies. The funereal scent filled the hallway. These are lovely, Chloe, I said, my voice neutral. I'll put them in water. Dinner was excruciating. They tried to make small talk, but the unspoken agenda hung in the air between us. Finally, as I was clearing the plates, Chloe placed her fork down with a delicate click. Well, she said, looking from me to Leo, I think we all know why we're here. I sat back down and folded my hands on the table. I'm not sure that I do, I said calmly. Why don't you tell me? Chloe exchanged a look with Leo, a look that said, see? She's going to be difficult. She then turned back to me, her face a mask of patient understanding. Your son and I are very worried about you. This house, this situation, it's not sustainable. And your recent behavior, changing the locks, being so secretive, it's concerning. My recent behavior is a direct result of your recent behavior, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice even. She let out a small, theatrical sigh. We found a wonderful assisted living community for you. It's more like a resort, really. It has a pool, social activities, and on-site medical care. You'd be so much happier there. Safer. And what about my home? I asked. Well, Leo cut in, finally speaking up. We have an offer. A developer is interested in the property. It's a very generous offer, Mom. It would set you up for life. We've already had the preliminary papers drawn up, Chloe added, reaching for her large, expensive handbag that was sitting on the floor beside her chair. We just need you to sign them. This was it. The moment of truth. I let the silence stretch out. I looked at my son, at his anxious, unhappy face. I looked at his wife, her eyes gleaming with triumph. They thought they had me cornered. They thought the fight was over. I took a slow, deep breath. No, I said. The word hung in the air. Chloe's smile faltered. I don't think you understand, she said, her voice losing some of its silky smoothness. This isn't really a choice. You're not being rational. Am I not rational, Chloe? I asked, leaning forward slightly. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. This is it.
Now.
Or am I just not cooperating with your plan? I turned my gaze to my son. Leo, tell me something. Do you know about the secret credit card Chloe has? The one she opened in your name with a P.O. box for the address? Leo's head snapped toward me, his face a canvas of confusion.
What?
What are you talking about, Mom? That's crazy. Chloe's face, which had been perfectly made up, turned a blotchy, pale white. She's losing her mind, she said, her voice suddenly high and shrill. Leo, she's making things up to drive a wedge between us. Don't listen to her. Am I? I asked softly. I had my phone in my lap, beneath the tablecloth. I had been ready for this. Or is this me making things up? I slid the phone across the polished wood of the dining table. On the screen was the first photo I had taken from the briefcase, the credit card statement, with Leo's name clearly visible at the top and a balance that was well into 5 figures. Purchases from Chanel, Gucci, Louis Vuitton. Leo stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the phone to his wife, and back again. The color was draining from his face. Chloe, he whispered. What is this? It's fake, she shrieked, reaching for the phone. She faked it. She's a manipulative old woman. I pulled the phone back before she could grab it. I swiped to the next picture. It was the floor plan of my house, the one with the guest suite in the basement. I pushed the phone back toward Leo. And is this fake, too? The plan to knock down my walls and turn my home into your personal playground. I kept swiping. The contractor's quotes. The list of my financial assets. And finally, the most damning evidence of all, the photos of the pages from her notebook. The notes about emphasizing her forgetfulness, the calculations of my net worth. The list of my personal jewelry with little check marks next to the pieces she presumably wanted. Leo was no longer looking at the phone. He was staring at his wife, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Chloe, he said again, his voice choked. Did you write this? Chloe was cornered. The lies were not working. The sweet facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly, greedy truth beneath. She tried to rally, to find some other lie that might work. He wasn't on it, she suddenly screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. Your father. He told me this is what he wanted. He said the house was too much for you. Invoking my dead husband was a desperate, despicable move, and it was the last straw. A cold fury unlike anything I had ever felt washed over me. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You can't talk to me like that, she spat. Oh, I can, I said. But before you go, I have one more thing to show you. You were so concerned about me downsizing. It seems only fair that I help you with the same problem. You have so many beautiful things, Chloe. So many expensive things. It seems a shame for them to just sit in your closet, especially when you have so much debt in my son's name. I walked over to the sideboard, where my laptop was waiting. I had set it all up before they arrived. I opened it and turned the screen to face them. On the screen was the bright, familiar layout of the eBay homepage, and on it were several active listings. The first was for a Chanel handbag, the one she had been carrying just last week. The starting bid was 99 cents. The next was a pair of Christian Louboutin shoes. Then a Burberry trench coat. I had spent the entire afternoon photographing the contents of her forgotten briefcase and, more importantly, the contents of the designer shopping bags she had carelessly left in the guest room closet over the past few months. I had used her own descriptions from the store websites. I had listed about a dozen items in total. Your closet is now online, I said, my voice completely flat. Time to downsize. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Chloe stared at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she let out a sound that was half shriek, half sob. She lunged across the room, trying to grab the laptop. You can't do that. Those are mine. I stepped back, holding the laptop away from her. Leo, who had been sitting as if frozen, finally moved. He stood up and grabbed her arm. Chloe, stop, he said, his voice a dead monotone. She's selling my things, she screamed at him, struggling against his grip. They were bought with a secret credit card in my name, he said, his voice hollow. Maybe they're not yours to sell. The fight went out of her. She slumped against him, her face a mask of fury and defeat. I looked at them, this couple who had tried to steal my home and my dignity. I felt no pity, only a vast, empty coldness. Get out of my house, I said again. This time, my voice was like steel. Both of you.
Now.
Leo didn't argue. He pulled Chloe, who was now sobbing hysterically, toward the front door. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. At the door, he paused for a moment, his hand on the knob. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. He opened the door, and they were gone. I stood alone in the dining room, the scent of lilies thick in the air. I closed the laptop. The house was silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. It was not the silence of loss. It was the silence of victory. The aftermath was a storm, just as I had expected. My phone started ringing almost immediately. It was Chloe, her voice a venomous hiss of threats and accusations. She would sue me for theft, for defamation, for everything she could think of. I listened for a few seconds, then calmly hung up. She called back. I blocked her number. Then came the texts, a barrage of furious, misspelled messages filled with rage. I blocked her there, too. The eBay listings, however, were getting a lot of attention. Word must have spread through her social circle because the bids started climbing rapidly. It was a public humiliation, played out for all her designer-clad friends to see. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction watching the numbers go up. This wasn't about the money. It was about consequences. The next day, I received a call from a lawyer I didn't know. He introduced himself as Chloe's legal counsel and began a blustering speech about invasion of privacy and conversion of property. I let him talk for a minute, then I interrupted him. Before you continue, I said, my voice perfectly calm, you might want to ask your client about the concept of marital fraud. Specifically, about opening credit cards in her husband's name without his knowledge and running up tens of thousands of dollars in debt. I have all the documentation. I'm sure my son, Leo, would be very interested in pursuing that. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Furthermore, I continued, I have documented evidence of a concerted effort to manipulate me into signing over my property under false pretenses, which I believe is a form of elder abuse. My financial advisor has already reviewed the materials. So you can tell your client that if she wants to proceed with a lawsuit, I will be more than happy to countersue. And I will make sure every document, every text message, and every photograph becomes a matter of public record. The lawyer cleared his throat. I will have to confer with my client, he stammered. I never heard from him again. The person I did hear from was Leo. He called me 2 days after the disastrous dinner. He sounded terrible. His voice was hoarse, and I could tell he had been crying. Mom, he said, his voice breaking.
I'm so sorry.
I didn't say anything. I just waited. I had no idea, he went on, his words tumbling out in a rush. I swear I had no idea about the credit card, about the notebook, about how calculated it all was. I thought we were helping you. She convinced me it was the right thing to do. She said you were lonely and vulnerable and that we needed to take care of you. By putting me in the basement, Leo? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. He flinched, even over the phone. I didn't
think she was serious about that.
I thought it was just talk. An idea. I never would have let that happen. You were letting it happen, I said simply. You sat right there while she planned it. You were her willing accomplice. You chose her over me, over your own mother. A sob escaped him. I know.
God, I know.
I was weak. I was stupid. I just wanted to keep the peace. I loved her, Mom. I thought she loved me. Love doesn't involve secret debt and manipulation, Leo, I said. I am your mother, and I will always love you. But you have broken my trust. And that is a very, very hard thing to rebuild. What can I do? He pleaded. I'll do anything. For starters, I said, you can start taking responsibility for your own life. Stop letting other people make your decisions for you. Figure out who you are without her. We talked for a long time. It was a painful, difficult conversation. He told me he had confronted Chloe about everything. She had denied it all, then tried to blame him, then finally admitted it, but showed no remorse. She was only angry that she had been caught. He told me he had packed a bag and left their apartment that same night. He was staying with a friend. He had already seen a divorce lawyer. I didn't offer him comfort. I didn't tell him it would all be okay. I just listened. He had to walk this path on his own. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences, just as Chloe was living with hers. A week later, all the auctions on eBay had ended. The items sold for a surprising amount of money. I transferred the entire sum, every last penny, to a local charity that provided support services for elderly people who were victims of financial abuse. I sent the donation receipt to Leo with a simple note. This is where the money went. I didn't send one to Chloe. Life began to settle into a new kind of normal. My sister, Sarah, and my friend, Brenda, became my staunchest allies. They came over often, filling the house with laughter and conversation. We would sit in the garden, drinking tea, and they would listen as I talked about David, about my fears, and about my newfound strength. You're a different woman, Brenda told me one afternoon. You always had that steel in you, but David protected you, so you never had to use it. Now you're using it for yourself. She was right. The grief for my husband was still there, a constant companion, but it was no longer a crushing weight.
It was just a part of me now.
And alongside it was a fierce sense of self-preservation that I had not known I possessed. I had been tested, and I had not broken. A month after the big confrontation, Leo asked if he could see me. He didn't ask to come to the house. He suggested a neutral place, a quiet coffee shop in town. I agreed. I needed to see him, to see if there was anything left of the son I had raised. He looked older. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight. He looked humbled, broken, and profoundly sad. We sat in a small booth, a cup of coffee between us. He didn't try to make excuses for himself. He simply apologized again, this time with a clarity that had been missing from his frantic phone call. I let her ambition blind me, he said, staring into his cup. I was so proud of her, of the life we were building. I didn't want to see the parts that were ugly. I ignored the red flags. The way she talked about people, the way she was so obsessed with money and status, and the way she treated you. I told myself it was just a personality clash. I was a coward, Mom, and I am so sorry I let my cowardice hurt you. I listened, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the old love, the uncomplicated maternal love I had for the little boy he used to be. He was taking responsibility. It was a start. Trust is earned back in inches, Leo, not miles, I told him. This is the first inch. We sat for a little while longer, talking about simple things. His work.
My garden.
We didn't talk about Chloe. Her name was a ghost between us. As we were leaving, he hesitated. The divorce is moving forward, he said quietly. She's not making it easy. She's fighting for everything. I'm sure she is, I said. She cleaned out the apartment, he continued, his voice low. Took all the furniture, everything of value. Except, she left one thing. On the middle of the living room floor, he paused. She left my baby pictures. The ones you gave us. That, more than anything else, told me everything I needed to know about her. Our meetings became a semi-regular thing after that. Coffee, once every couple of weeks. The inches of trust started to add up. He was going to therapy. He was working on himself. He was slowly, painstakingly, trying to become a man his father would have been proud of. I knew he had a long way to go, but he was walking in the right direction. I, in the meantime, was rediscovering my own life. I started volunteering at the local library. I joined a gardening club. I took a trip to the coast with Sarah, something David and I had always talked about doing. I was living. I was not just surviving. The house was no longer a silent, empty space. It was my space. It was filled with my choices, my activities, my friends. It was a place of peace and security. I had fought for it, and in doing so, I had fought for myself. One evening, months later, I was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Hello. There was a pause, and then a voice I recognized instantly, though it was stripped of all its confidence. It was Chloe. I just wanted you to know, she said, her voice thin and reedy, that you ruined my life. I was silent for a moment, listening to the crickets chirping in the garden. I thought about all the things I could say to her. I could tell her that she had ruined her own life with her greed and deceit. I could tell her that she had tried to ruin mine and failed. I could have screamed at her for the pain she had caused my son and me. But I didn't. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, nothing at all. She was just a voice on the phone, a ghost from a battle that was already won. I think you have the wrong number, I said, and I hung up. I sat there for a long time as the twilight deepened into night. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, lost in grief, feeling adrift and alone. And I thought about the woman I was now. I had learned a hard lesson, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can hurt you the deepest. But I had also learned that I was stronger than I ever thought possible. They had looked at me and seen a fragile old woman, a relic to be managed and put away. They thought they could just whisper a few words and my whole world would crumble. They finally learned what it feels like to be powerless, to have their own lives dismantled and sold off to the highest bidder. I looked around at my home, my sanctuary, safe and sound. I no longer gave warnings. I just acted. And I was finally at peace.